Well, yesterday was Veterans Day, so let's talk a little bit about that, and let's talk about post-traumatic stress. That's coming up on today's Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hello, folks. I'm Chuck Holton, and this is the Hot Zone podcast. I hope you've been watching some of our previous episodes because we had a lot of good stuff coming out of Syria. Yesterday was Veterans Day, and I got a lot of well wishes from people and a lot of people that wrote to say thank you for my service. And I really appreciate that. That's very nice. Although it kind of makes me uncomfortable because I don't really feel like my service was that much of a sacrifice. I feel like I got more out of the time I spent in the military, my service to our country, than I put into it. And indeed, when it was time to put in for service-connected disabilities and all that sort of thing, even though I actually had a broken ankle the day I ended my time in service in the military, I've never even registered with the Veterans Administration or anything like that, just because I feel like that's what I signed up for. And I pledged my youth, I pledged my health to the country, and in reality, I'm in pretty good shape for a 50-year-old guy, considering that I got out of the military literally 2 inches shorter than I went in. That's not a joke. And that's just from carrying a rucksack around, jumping out of airplanes, all the, that sort of thing. Some of that has come back as my spine has sort of uncompressed when I got out of the military, but that may cause me some problems in the future. But like I say, overall, I got a whole lot more out of my service in the military than I put into it, I feel like. And so when people say, thank you for your service, I kind of go, well, thank you for caring. But it's a little awkward and uncomfortable. And I think a lot of veterans feel that way. So while we're on the topic of veterans and Veterans Day and people serving and sacrificing and that sort of thing, let's talk about post-traumatic stress. And I want to open up a little bit and just tell you a little bit about what's going on with me, my story, and that sort of thing. It has always interested me that far more veterans apply for post-traumatic stress benefits. And you notice I don't say PTSD. I think we should stop calling it a disorder, and I'll talk a little bit more about why in just a second. But first, let's talk some numbers. When you have probably about upwards of 2 million people who have served in the global war on terror since 2001 that have served in the combat zone, and something like maybe less than 20% have been awarded medals for combat. That is the combat action badge that is given, or that sort of thing, for actually seeing combat. That is actually being there when bullets were being fired and things were blowing up. Less than 20% of the people who go to combat, who serve in a combat zone, are actually awarded one of those badges. And if you know anything about the way that the military awards those kinds of badges, I think they're dramatically overrepresent the actual tip of the spear, the actual people who are firing shots in anger at the enemy. And this is, please don't hear me denigrating anybody's service or downplaying anybody's sacrifice. That is not what I'm doing here. I'm simply talking statistics. When you look at the fact that less than 20% of people who have served in a combat zone have been awarded medals, combat action medals. So what that probably means is that in reality, people who have actually seen heavy combat, this has been in multiple firefights, been out on patrol many times, and have seen lots of mayhem and carnage, you're probably talking about something like 2% of the people who deploy to, under 10%, 2% of the military. So that is because that not everybody deploys to a combat zone. So there's only, some small percentage, maybe 30% of people in the military who actually end up deploying to combat, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, someplace like that. And of those people, only about 20% are awarded badges. And of the people who are awarded badges, some smaller percentage of them actually are putting their lives in massive risk, going toe-to-toe with the enemy on a semi-regular basis, okay? And so you're talking about a small percentage of a small percentage of a small percentage of a small percentage. That is, the number of Americans serving in the military is 0.4%. The number of people serving in the military who serve in a combat zone is about 30%. The number of people serving in a combat zone who are awarded a combat action badge is about 20%. And the number of people who actually see regular combat or are engaged with the enemy on a regular basis is a much smaller subset of that. So again, this is not to say that anything about somebody's experience, that it wasn't, valid or anything like that. All I'm saying is statistics. So what we're talking about is an incredibly small number of people who actually have been in traumatic stress, meaning your buddy's head blowing up and, people getting killed and left and right and, that sort of thing, living under that kind of fear. Now, give for an example, my son Mason, who served honorably, just returned from a 10-month deployment to Afghanistan. He is a medevac crew chief, so he's literally, his job is to go into where bad things are happening and rescue the people who are wounded and take them out of there. Well, right now, because U.S. troops are not really engaging the enemy, so to speak. They're not going out on patrols. They're not doing like they used to do in 2006, 2007, 2008. They're mostly staying on the base. So the vast majority of the people that Mason was going and picking up were not U.S. troops. They were actually Afghan troops or Afghan civilians. But of the U.S. troops that they were picking up, virtually all of them that had been wounded in combat were special operations forces. So they're very small, very few number of people in Afghanistan right now who are actually engaging the enemy, going out off the base. Now, while Mason was there, they had indirect fire come in from time to time, probably more than once a week. And that is, mortars or rockets being shot at the base. But the base is a very large base. It's an airfield and it's very large. And so it's not like, you're running to the chow hall and there's bombs going off next to you or anything like that. I went and visited him over there. Nothing happened while we were there. We didn't hear anything. He had some traumatic things happen. He had somebody throw up blood in his face, when he was trying to treat a wounded patient, that sort of thing. So those are traumatic events. But it wasn't like a sustained amount of trauma like you see in World War II or you see in combat movies, things like that. Again, this is not to downplay anything that they did. I keep saying that, but that's very important. What they did was important. They were saving lives, and what they saw was outside the normal realm of human experience when it comes to your average American. So why is it then that 30% of U.S. veterans, between up to 20% of all veterans of deployments in the global war on terror, up to 20% in any given year claim post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, let's not call it a disorder. It's just post-traumatic stress. Why is it that so many more claim PTS than actually experience very traumatic things in war? This is a sensitive subject because I know I'm going to get a lot of veterans that are angry at me. They say, "Oh, but you're saying that I didn't see anything. I can tell you I saw more than most people." Look, I'm not downplaying anything that anybody did or saw. All I'm doing is quoting the numbers, actual numbers to you. And the numbers show that a much larger percentage of people claim post-traumatic stress or are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress than actually engaged in massive amounts of combat. The kind of combat you would expect people to come back with post-traumatic stress, suffering from post-traumatic stress from the kind of combat you see in the movies. Okay, it's a very small percentage. And if you're one of those, thank you. Thank you for enduring that. That's great. Look, I'm one of those people, okay? So now I want to explain to you why I think that is. I mean, some people might say, oh, these people are just trying to get over. They're just trying to get benefits from the U.S. government, and claiming post-traumatic stress is an easy thing to claim because it's kind of a subjective thing. Like, I get scared in large crowds and I have nightmares. Okay, great. Here's some money. I mean, I could go and apply for some sort of disability rating from the Veterans Administration because of my combat experience in Panama, and say, yeah, I still have nightmares about it. It really has affected my relationships and blah, blah, blah. I could come up with all sorts of reasons, and I could probably get a good 10, 20, 30% disability rating, which means like $800 a month. I mean, why not? Tax, it's a tax rebate, right? Well, and I haven't done that, and I'm not planning on doing that because I just don't feel like the things that I've experienced rise to that level. Now, maybe for some people they do. That's okay. But why is it that a larger percentage of people apply for those for post-traumatic stress disability rating than have actually been on the pointy end of the spear? Here's why, I think. I think that a lot of things get lumped together and called post-traumatic stress that may or may not be. Now, I'm not an expert. I'm not a psychologist, but I'm just going from my own personal experience. And this is where it really is personal for me. I've been noticing some things about me, about my personality, since I got back from Syria last week that have caused some issues and some difficulties with my family. I'll go more into that in a second. But I think that there's several pieces to this. Well, let me tell you what I've been facing. When I was in Syria, I was only there for 2 weeks, okay? But I saw maybe a dozen dead bodies while I was there. Children. Matter of fact, the last body that I saw before I left was a 10-year-old boy who had his leg blown off and was dead. I saw wounds, some very grievous wounds, gunshots, shrapnel, things like that. That's what we were there to do, was to go get those people and treat them. Lots of blood, that sort of thing. I don't feel like it bothered me that much. I feel like when you're in that scenario, hey, everybody there sort of, you play the game, you take your chances. Most of the people that were hurt, most of the people that were hurt were military-age males. Okay, my brain can it has a box for that. Okay, so I can deal with that. That's okay. However, when I got back, I've noticed some things that I haven't noticed in a while because, as you've probably figured out, this was a much more intense trip than my normal trip. And my normal trips are often pretty dangerous and scary. But this one was worse. And part of it had to do with the fact that we were right on the front line experiencing combat, actually getting shot at. I personally was shot at by a sniper the second to last day I was there, missed me by about 6 feet. And that's not a good feeling. We survived a near ambush. That's something I never experienced even when I was in combat in the military, in the Rangers. A near ambush is pretty scary with machine guns kicking up dust all around. And although I was in the vehicle, I was watching my buddies, running away while bullets were skipping off the pavement all around them. And that was pretty traumatic. That was pretty stressful, Having to listen to the drone go overhead was probably the most stressful thing we had to face. There was just a drone overhead every 20 minutes or so all the time while we were out there. And you'd look up and you could once in a while you could see it, and you could see the bombs on its wings, and you'd just wait for that thing to let loose a bomb on top of you. And indeed, a couple days after I left, that actually happened, and one of the Free Burma Rangers was killed by the Turkish drone strike. So that's something I've never had to face before. I've never really had to face a threat from the air that's sort of ever present and is just there all the time, day and night. And you just don't know, like, how do you run from that? You don't. You just don't know when your world's going to explode. And that's a stressful thing. So when I got back, I've noticed that I've been a little short with my family. My wife took a wrong turn the other day when we were going to a banquet, and I just blew up like, what are you? Did you forget that the parking lot's on the other side of the building? Like, what's wrong with you? I don't talk to my wife that way, and she didn't appreciate it, as you can imagine. And that was wrong for me to do. But as I thought about it later on, as I sort of processed that, I realized somebody mentioned, hey, maybe it's PTSD. And I was like, yeah, right. I don't get PTSD. Not me, not Chuck Holton, But then as I thought about it, I thought, it's not exactly post-traumatic stress. It's more the fact that when I'm in that environment, when you're in a combat environment like that and things are just life and death, when somebody makes a mistake, it could literally get people killed. And so this is not time for the typical corporate, hey, could you go ahead and maybe next time, it's not like that. That's messed up. Don't do it again. Make sure that's fixed. Okay. And we don't have time to beat around the bush, and it's just a totally no slack environment. That's just how the military is, and that's how the Free Burma Rangers is. And there was actually one time while I was there that I got yelled at because I was talking on the phone while we were on a mission. And look, I can't afford to have my attention distracted when I'm on a mission, and I was completely in the wrong there. I would have got after one of my guys. If one of my sons had done that, I would have gone after him. So I was totally in the wrong, and I admitted it. And Dave Eubank came to me and said, that was messed up. Don't do that again. And I said, you're absolutely right. So when you come from an environment like that, that's just no slack, it's all men, there's none of this soft little, we got to be careful about each other's feelings and that sort of thing. You just say it like it is. And you come back to the real world where you have to be sensible and you have to be sensitive to people's feelings, and you can't just tell people they're screwed up and they got to fix it right now, especially your spouse. That's bad. Then it just takes a while for you to get out of that mode. And that's not necessarily post-traumatic stress. It doesn't really have anything to do with the stress of being over there. It just has to do with the fact that being in that kind of environment is a completely different lifestyle. It's much more Spartan. It's much less grace-filled. And it's just get it done. Mission gets accomplished. That's the only thing that matters. So then you come back to real life and you get all these intricacies and the little subtleties of relationship cues and, sexual politics between you and your spouse or whatever. And here you find yourself just going, blowing up. This doesn't make it right. It just sort of is. And it's still wrong. It's still something I've got to deal with. And I am. And I think talking about it to you is one way that I can deal with it. But that's apart from, I saw a guy get his head blown off and my brain is screwed up because of that and I'm going to have nightmares. That's a different thing. But it gets lumped in there with post-traumatic stress. And so it doesn't really have a name that I know of. So maybe we need to coin a term for that. If you can think of one, send me an email. But the other thing is that when you're in that kind of environment, it simplifies life. Life is just much simpler. You just try to stay alive and get the job done, and you come home and you get all this minutia that's, bills and relationships and your kids are talking back to you and crazy stuff. And you just go, it's just so complex. And it's actually, combat is so much simpler. And you almost want to just go back there. Like I would just rather be there and have to worry about getting blown up. It's better. It's easier than having to worry about my kid who's being disrespectful and the bills that aren't getting paid or just whatever, So there's that as well. There's that other component. And again, that doesn't have to do with the stress of combat. It has to do with the stress of real life. And But again, it changes you. Being in that environment, being over there in a combat environment changes you a little bit. And the longer you're there, the more it changes you. So you can imagine if you're in a kind of low-grade combat situation like my son Mason was for 10 months, and you're surrounded by harsh realities and you're surrounded by only adults who are all subscribed to the same worldview that get the job done, that's all that matters, and quit your crying, and don't mess up and whatever. Everything's very clear cut. And then after 10 months of that, with by the way, no children, no mom, no grandparents, no old people, all those things that sort of soften the society for us in real life. You go away from those things for 10 months and you come back, and it's just very different. It's a lot like moving to another country. You got used to a different culture, and you come back here, and the culture is, my wife deals with this when she goes back to West Virginia. She drives like a Panamanian, and people in West Virginia think she's a psychotic. They think she's a maniac. You should see how I drive. I make her look tame, okay? So it's not, I don't know that you classify that as post-traumatic stress. It's just culture shock. Maybe that's what we should call it, culture shock. Whatever it is, our men and women in uniform deal with those kinds of issues big time when they come back and try to reintegrate into family life. When a man has been gone for 10 months and his wife has been running the ship at home, and she's gotten used to doing all the bills and taking care of everything and making sure everything gets done, and he comes home and he starts trying to tell the kids to clean their room, and she's like, wait a minute, we cleaned our room on Wednesday and it's only Monday, whatever. The guy struggles then with feelings of, I'm not needed here. What's the point? So I've been involved in this driving purpose where things are life and death, and it's a very important mission over there for 10 months. And now I come home and I'm sort of extraneous at this point because my whole family's been going on without me. That's stressful. It's not stress from the trauma of combat. It's the stress of reintegration into society. And so all of that gets lumped together, and I think it shouldn't be. I think we ought to recognize it for what it is. And so if you have a loved one who has been deployed and is acting a little strange and doesn't like to be in crowded places, or has trouble sleeping, or is prone to outbursts, or is being sullen and withdrawn, understand that some of that is not because they've been murdering people and they've been blood and guts and veins in my teeth and all this kind of stuff over in combat. It's just a matter of they've come from a very, very different culture, and they have to get back to speed in the real world. And you can help them do that by just having grace with them, by recognizing it for what it is, by doing things to sort of grease the skids a little bit and kind of make things go more smoothly, talking about it, encouraging your troop, to your service member, to talk about it as well. The more I know, the more I talk about it, the better I feel. And the more I feel like, what it does is it helps my brain kind of get a box built to put those experiences in so I can make sense of them. Because when you see a little 10-year-old boy with his leg blown off and laying there dead on the stretcher, your brain really doesn't have a place to put that. And so it struggles to digest what you've seen. And so maybe the sleeplessness or the dreams or whatever is just your brain trying to chew that up, trying to digest it. And we can be grace-filled with the people coming back. And I would encourage you to do that, especially as we come out of Veterans Day. So that's all I've got for the podcast today. Thanks for watching, folks. It means a lot to me. I'd love to hear your feedback. I hope you're listening or watching and sharing it with your friends. All right. I'm Chuck Holton, and this has been The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.